To this video on teaching your first online class. My name is Jamie from ESL Teacher 365. I started teaching online in 2020 after teaching in the classroom for many years. So I hope that this video is helpful today. I'll be sharing my top tips to help you feel more confident when getting started as an online teacher. I would love to know where you are watching from today. If you're joining us live or if you're catching up on the replay, you can leave a comment in the chat or in the comments down below. And we will do live Q&A at the end of this free training. If you have any questions, you can save them if you're joining live. And if you're catching the replay, leave your comments or questions down below, and I always go through my comments and answer questions. The first tip that I want to give you is about your equipment. You want to prep your equipment, and you also want to test your equipment before you start online teaching. This is probably one of the most stressful parts of online teaching because of the technology. Things can go wrong. Of course, in the physical classroom, that happens as well. You never really know what's going to happen. But here are some tricks that you can use and a little bit of a checklist to go through. So the first tip is the internet connection. For teaching online, generally it is recommended to have a wired connection over Wi-Fi. Obviously, if you're traveling while teaching, that's going to be a bit more challenging unless you want to carry around your cable with you. But you do want to check the strength of your connection. And if you're working for different companies, they usually have requirements for your internet connection. It has to be a specific upload and download speed or strength. So do check those out. If you are working on a marketplace or freelance teaching, it might not be as important, but definitely with the companies, if you're having any sort of internet issue, then you do need to get that fixed because they can just dismiss you just for that. So do be a little bit careful. For your camera, I have a lot of teachers that ask me, can I start with the camera that's on my laptop? Yes, you can, but I recommend having another webcam just because it's a little bit easier to control. You can zoom in and zoom out. You can control the quality. If you are teaching something that isn't English, maybe you're teaching dance, like I teach dance online, you might need something that's a bit more wide angle. And you can always use your laptop camera as your backup. So imagine you're having an issue with your external webcam, then you can use that camera that's on your laptop. So that way you kind of have two different options. In terms of a microphone, some companies do require a headset with an attached microphone. And you might think, well, why is that? If you're teaching languages, having that microphone nice and close actually helps your students understand the pronunciation better. They can hear the sounds more clearly. It helps reduce some of that background noise as well. So you will see that some companies require this, but if you're teaching on marketplaces or freelancing, you're kind of able to do whatever. So I use a clip-on microphone. It's just really easy for travel. And then I have separate earbuds or I have a separate headset that I use in terms of headphones. And again, you want to test these things out. I've been teaching classes where my microphone has suddenly died. So I do have like a little kit that mine came in, and I actually have a second microphone as well. So that was really handy because I was in the middle of my class. My students said, I can't hear you. And so I was able to switch it out really easily. You don't need to get something that's expensive like the one that I have. You can just get like I said, that headset with the microphone, or you could get a small USB mic. But again, always kind of have like your first one that you use and then a backup because you want to be able to switch it out easily. And you need to test it with your computer and with the teaching platform to make sure that it all works together. For your computer, one big issue that a lot of online teachers have is, for example, if you're using Zoom, If you don't have it updated regularly, there can be glitches. Maybe your students can't get into the classroom, or you have issues or connectivity issues, and it can just be because it's not updated. I also like to remind my students to update their Zoom. So if they are having issues, usually it's because we're running different updates or versions, and I don't know, it just doesn't work quite well. So remind them every once in a while to update their Zoom if you're using Zoom as your platform, and keep yours up to date as well. Another tip is something that I experienced recently when we were traveling and I was teaching online. My laptop screen decided to stop working. And luckily, my partner had an extra like travel monitor. So again, having like that backup, because without that, I would have had to cancel the classes from my phone. I could not see my students at all. So having something like a second monitor if you're teaching from home, or a travel monitor, can be a lifesaver. And then in general, another issue that I've had problems with are just cables. So the cables that connected my microphone to my computer stopped working. So make sure you have some backups for those, and just check all of your cables and ensure that your students can hear you, can see you clearly. So the gist is test everything out, have your first option, and then always have some sort of backup. So that is how you can go through all of your equipment. In terms of your teaching platform, you also want to test this out and practice navigating before you start working with learners. This will look a little bit different if you're teaching on a platform through a company, or if you're working on a marketplace or freelance teaching. So let's imagine that you are teaching on Zoom and you've never taught on Zoom before. So some things that you might want to practice with are screen sharing. So if you have some sort of PDF worksheet, or maybe you want to show a video, you want to practice screen sharing. And also, if you're planning on using the sound, there are some settings in Zoom that you have to enable so that your students can hear your computer sound. You are also going to want to use breakout rooms. If you're teaching a large class, you're having them work on some activities in small groups, maybe some speaking activities, and then you kind of go in and check through each breakout room. Know how to do that before you start teaching. It's a lot more stressful when you have your students staring at you, waiting for you to get going and figure things out. There's a lot of different tutorials on YouTube that you can watch to look at all these settings, but just be careful because some of those tutorials are quite old and Zoom has changed where things are placed. So go through, test it with a friend, a family member, and practice screen sharing, putting them in breakout rooms. And another thing that's important for online teaching is the whiteboard function. Do you want your students to be able to also write on the whiteboard, or do you want to be the only one? If you're teaching young learners, you might not want to give them access to the whiteboard. If they're too young, they might just be kind of scribbling all over the place. So there is a way to change the settings where you can either grant access to other people or restrict that access. And you need to know how to use all the different tools on the whiteboard to get the best use out of it as well. Sound, again, if you're sharing some sort of video. Also, if you just want to play some music, maybe you're having them work on a writing prompt and you want to play some, calming music, check that setting. Another thing that you might consider is your background. So if you're teaching from home, you probably have some sort of background set up. But if you're teaching while traveling, you might want to blur your background or have some sort of background behind you. Then you can practice where that is. And also the chat function. The chat function is really nice for online teaching. It's something that is quite different from the brick and mortar classroom. So practice that. How do you send a message? You have to look at it a little bit because sometimes it only sends a message to one student as opposed to all students. So practice that with your family or friends. If you're using a platform like Classin, there's a lot of online companies that now use Classin. It is similar to Zoom, but it's actually more complicated because you can store your teaching materials there. There's like a timer, there's a dice function, there's all these different things. So test those out, find out where everything is. As a new online teacher, it can be very overwhelming. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by the technology, then try one new thing each class. Practice that before you teach it, know where it is, incorporate that into your lesson. Don't try and do too many different things. You'll just end up confused. Your students will feel like, the lesson isn't going very well. So just try one thing at a time, but do build up your skill set and know where all of those things are. If you are teaching on a platform like maybe it's Lingo Ace or Cambly or Preply, those typically have their own teaching platforms. So they may have whiteboard functions, they may have other things. Practice those if you can, but you can't always do that. For example, for Lingo Ace, there are some functions that you can practice with before your student is there. So you can go into the classroom early, take a look at your lesson materials, practice with a few different things, but there are some functions that only work when a student is there. So just be aware of that it may not be possible to kind of test these things out before you have a student. But again, just focus on adding one new thing or trying one new thing each lesson if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with that. My third tip is to go through your lesson materials before you start teaching. So we have prepped our equipment, tested it out, looked at our teaching platform. We're feeling more confident. We know how to navigate it. What about the lesson materials? So we have two scenarios. The first would be that the lesson plan materials are provided and if they are not provided. So if they are provided, usually these are online teaching companies for kids and they are just little slideshows or there may be some sort of worksheet that you're working with. So what you can do is look at that ahead of time and then pick out different props or flashcards or activities to complement that lesson. You want to help bring this online lesson to life, and you don't just have to teach the slides. You can incorporate objects, you can incorporate flashcards, and then if you do have learners that tend to finish the slides quickly, you may want to choose some other activities that you can use. So also know that with a lot of these online teaching platforms, your class schedule or the learners you're teaching, that can change really fast. So don't look at them too early because I knew that a student was booked with me a week ahead of time. And then about 2 hours before the lesson, they got switched with a different student and it was a completely different lesson. So I had prepped everything for this one lesson and then I ended up teaching something else. So maybe an hour, 2 hours before, you can quickly take a look and see what you'll be teaching. But that's just a little tip for some of those companies. If you are teaching on a marketplace, that would be something like Preply, italki, even Cambly is more of a marketplace than a company because you are working with different students and not necessarily using provided materials. Or if you're freelancing, then your first lesson is usually going to be some sort of level test or a needs analysis. This you could do before. You could send a level test to your students, maybe using the chat function before the lesson, or sometimes they have like a messaging system. So it's almost like sending an email to your students and say, hey, can you take this level test? Let me know which level you get. Or you may just be meeting this student and doing your own kind of more informal level test during the first lesson. So even if you did send that level test, I still recommend having a bit of a conversation with them, not only to see their level if you're teaching languages, but also to introduce yourself, to get to know them a little bit, and more importantly, to know some of their goals. Why are they planning on taking your classes? What would they like to achieve? And just to know a bit more. If you're not teaching a language, for example, like I said, I teach dance as well. The first class, maybe you're just kind of meeting the student or doing an intro lesson. So I've done kind of one-time classes where I do a lesson with my students, and then I try to filter them into my group classes. So I always follow up, ask how they thought the lesson went, and invite them to my longer weekly classes. Same thing with languages. You'll definitely want to follow up after that first lesson, send them a little message, let them know what they did well, how you think that they would fit in your classes, if you think it's a good relationship to work with them, and invite them to book weekly classes with you, for example. Another thing that you can do is a full needs analysis. I would say that this is more important if it's your freelance business. That way you can really keep track of their goals. And also, this is quite common for if you're teaching business English as well. Okay, our fourth tip is plan on how you're going to interact with your students. So, what do I mean by this? First, icebreaker. At the start of every class, you want to have some sort of activity to get your students speaking in that language or get them ready for your subject, whether it's academics or could be music or dance. You want to consider their age and their level and have some sort of activity. So let's just talk about as if we are doing ESL teaching right now. So you want to get your students speaking in that language, thinking in that language, and feeling comfortable. So it shouldn't be something that's too challenging, and it shouldn't be too long either. So a quick activity that you can do. If you do need some ideas, I do have a lesson planning pack for ESL teachers. It has lots of different games and activities that can be used as icebreakers or at the end of class to wrap things up as well for all ages and levels. So you can check that out if you would like. The next kind of part of how you're going to interact with your students, let's go through a checklist again and talk about different functions of the online classroom that you can use for interaction. The first one would be the chat function. Are you going to be sending messages to individual students? Are you going to be sending these messages to the whole class? How will they respond back to you? This is a fantastic way to get them writing in your language that you're teaching, learning more about each other, and interacting. Some students are quite shy. There are teachers who mention that their students don't like turning on the camera. And it depends on your platform. Some platforms require the student's camera to be on, some do not. And of course, no one really likes teaching to just a black space, but at least you can get them interacting with that chat function. So that's one option that you have. Also, the camera. This is something that is different from the physical classroom. You can bring yourself closer. You can move away from your camera. You can also have your students do the same. If you're teaching pronunciation, you can zoom your camera in on your mouth so that they can actually see how you're making those sounds. If you're working with young kids and you want them to get up and moving, you can ask them to move closer to the camera or out of the frame, whatever you want to do, but think of how you're going to use that camera to interact with your students. Another thing you can do is a shared document. Some online teachers like to use Google Documents, for example, and maybe you put them in a breakout room, you give them access to their shared document, and they have to write some quiz questions together, or they have to write a paragraph. So think about how you're going to get them to interact with each other and then you can maybe interact through correcting some of their work or writing additional questions. There are also ways where you can annotate different materials. So if you have a PDF worksheet and you want to be able to write on it, or you want your students to be able to write on it. So if you're teaching young kids, there's a company called Koala, and they offer what's called a co-browser. So basically anything from the internet or any PDF, they make it so that you can write on that, and so can your students. So if you're working with students that you think this would be helpful, I would take a look at that. Otherwise, there are ways usually to share PDFs or share websites, and you can write on it, but it's a little bit more difficult if you want your students to write on it. That's why I recommend Koala. Breakout rooms are another way to interact with your students. What a breakout room is you're going to divide your class into different groups, and then you're kind of popping in and out of the different groups, giving feedback. You have to be a little bit careful with this depending on the platform that you're teaching on, because some platforms require you to be with your students at all times, so they don't allow you to use breakout rooms. So just take a look and see if that's possible. But if you're freelance teaching, obviously not an issue there. Another general tip for interacting with your students is to use their names. This is teaching in general, of course, but I think sometimes with all the technology with online teaching, and we're trying to screen share and share the sound and all these different things, we can forget that we need to be using our students' names as much as possible. Just helps them feel more included and build that community within your classroom. And then finally, how are you going to end your class? I like to end classes with something called an exit ticket. This could be some sort of question. This could be a quick quiz. Maybe everyone has to tell me a word that starts with a certain letter, or a phrasal verb, or an adjective that, whatever you're working on, you can use that. For my dance classes, I teach for young kids, and we do show and tell at the end, and that just helps kind of wrap up everything. And I also give them a teaser of the next week's class. So next week, we are going to be dancing to this song or this story. So it's just another way that you can interact with your students and keep them engaged while you're online teaching. Okay, let's get to our fifth tip. Set yourself up for success. So this looks like before you start your lesson, before you click, the start button on your teaching platform, make sure you are all set up, your kind of desk situation. Have some water, always have, something to drink. If you have a cold, have your tissues ready. Your phone should be on silent. Another thing with online teaching platforms is a lot of them have dress codes. So Lingo Ace, for example, they want you to wear a solid color. And so like no logos, no writing on your shirt. And then they don't want you to show your shoulders. So just depending on where your students are located that you're teaching them, sometimes they'll have these rules that you have to follow, but not always, but just kind of double check if that is required. Make sure that you're comfortable, shouldn't be too hot, shouldn't be too cold. Listen and see if there's any kind of noise going on. And if there is a lot of noise, there are ways to kind of cancel your background noise. Have your materials ready and within reach. So if you plan on using a mini whiteboard, get all of those materials ready. Your flashcards, your props, whatever you have them easily within grabbing distance, so you're not going around and searching for things. Some of the online classes with kids are really short, like 20, 15, 25 minutes. So you're wasting a lot of time if you're searching around for things. Just be ready and prepared. Also, know what the policy is for late and no-show learners. Each company has kind of a different policy. Some of them you have to wait 10 minutes, some you have to wait 13 minutes, some you have to send a message if your student is late or if there's a no-show. So have that policy maybe written down somewhere so it's ready for you. And if something happens, you know exactly what to do. For marketplaces, could be similar for freelance teaching. That's your business. So you get to decide what your policy is for that. And again, if you are kind of feeling overwhelmed as a new online teacher, I want you to focus on how you're helping your students. Your class doesn't have to be perfect. Everything doesn't have to go perfectly. There's going to be times when your connection doesn't work, when your microphone dies, whatever happens. But if you focus on helping your students improve and having a good relationship with them, that is more important than everything going perfectly. Okay, we're getting towards tip 6 and 7. For tip 6, have a plan B. So I did talk about this with all of our tech stuff, right? You kind of want to have your main option. Another thing I forgot to say about the internet is recently when we were traveling, some of the Wi-Fi in the places that we were wasn't very good. So we ended up using hotspots on our phone. I know that if you're traveling around other countries like Asia, this is quite common to get a hotspot and actually use that for all of your teaching. So do consider that if you are moving around and not teaching from home. Extra materials. When you're teaching on platforms or for companies, sometimes the students aren't at the right level. So they could be either lower than what you're anticipating or higher. It's a good idea to plan some different activities or maybe have a document with some quick ideas that you can use if you find yourself in a situation where you're going through a lesson and it's just not a good fit for those students. Imagine that it's too difficult, then maybe you'll just focus on one aspect of the lesson or go back to basics and kind of practice with that. If they finish the lesson really quickly, you definitely need some extra activities. So whether those are some extra questions, an icebreaker, just have those prepared. Another thing that can happen, especially with young learners, is maybe they're not engaged in the lesson. Maybe it wasn't their idea to take this class. So what do? You need to be able to switch quickly or take a break or get them to try something else if it's just not working. So have an idea planned out of what that looks like before you start teaching. I'll try and give you an example. I've had classes where students have had a family member in the background that was really distracting them. So maybe the student was kind of focused on the lesson, not really. They kept hearing noise or being asked questions by their family member. So that is when I used my camera to kind of change things with the lesson, asking them to get close or stand up or just getting them moving around kind of helps. But those were quite young learners. And also, like I said before, know how to get help for issues. Some of these platforms will have a specific chat, or maybe they'll have someone that you can message if there's some sort of emergency situation or if something goes wrong. This can be a little bit scary. Imagine something happens to your student while you're teaching the lesson. You need to know ahead of time what the protocol is and who to contact in case there is an issue. So just prepare, prepare for anything. My last tip today would be to give yourself grace and reflect after class. Again, you are a new teacher. That doesn't mean that you have to do everything perfectly. Each class you're going to improve. Focus on improving just 1% each time. And over time, you'll become more confident. You'll become a better teacher. It will get easier, I promise. It is very challenging to get started as a teacher in general, and as an online teacher, you have the added difficulties of all of this technology. So just give yourself some grace for that. A good way to do this, to even see if you're improving or how you're improving, is after your lessons, write down some notes or write in a journal what went well with the lesson, what would you improve next time. I like to go through the lesson that I taught, and if I realize maybe, okay, this I could have spent more time on, or this was kind of confusing the way that I explained it, take some notes so that the next time you teach this lesson, that you can teach it better and you can feel more confident. And just in general, like, how did you feel after the lesson? What is something that you did well? What is something that you know still need to work on? And that can help you with your confidence. So if you found this helpful today and you have any other questions, my email is jamie@eslteacher365.com. So feel free to send me an email if you're a new teacher and still have some other questions. I will go through a few different resources that I have that can help you as a new teacher, and then we will get into the live Q&A. So if you are live and you have questions about online teaching, make sure to share those in the chat. I'll go through those. So the first thing that I have to help you is my online teaching course called Teach Online in 10 Days. This is a self-paced online course with lifetime access, and it goes through like all of these logistics that I shared today. So it also talks about where to find online teaching jobs. You'll get access to my online teaching jobs list and how to scale your business, the 3 different ways to teach online. So if you've done your TEFL certificate and you want to teach online, but you feel not ready yet, then I would suggest checking out this course. So just eslteacher365.com/course. If you're interested in freelance online teaching, I have a free PDF handbook that you can check out that goes through kind of all the different steps to get started as a freelance online teacher. I did not start with companies. I started as a freelancer. Then I went to marketplaces. I started on Outschool and Cambly, and now I test out different companies for my channel as well. So you don't have to start with companies. You can start with freelancing if you have some teaching experience. If you want to teach online, teach abroad, or both, I do have a survey that you can fill out, and I will send you an email back with some personalized tips and links. So you can go to eslteacher365.com/survey to fill that out. I've had almost 6,000 teachers fill that out. I'm getting very, very close to 6,000 teachers. So maybe you'll be the 6,000th teacher. And I also do offer coaching calls for teachers that are getting started. Maybe you have questions on TEFL certificates or where you should teach online, getting started, equipment, anything like that. These are short little 30-minute Zoom calls. They are $30 until July 1st. So you can check that out, my teacher help call at eslteacher365.com/call. Okay, let's get into the Q&A. I'm going to get some water. Okay. Let's take a look. Some questions. Okay. So Teach Me Everything says, how do you learn TPR better? So TPR is total physical response. And that is essentially when you are using different movements to teach vocabulary or concepts for usually very young learners. So for example, if you're teaching the word apple, you might go apple, apple. Or if you want them to repeat something or say something, you can put your hands behind your ear as if you're listening for their response, or point to yourself when you're talking and then listen for their response, or repeat after me. That's a great question. So how do you learn all of these things? I would say I learned a lot of them from watching other teachers. These days on YouTube, there's a lot of teachers that do different example demo videos. So you can take a look at those, or you can look at videos that teachers have created for ESL learners. And if they're for quite young learners, they will usually be doing TPR in those videos. So take a look at those, see what kind of actions that they're using. There's no real code to it or anything. So anything that you create that works for you, that is what you can use, just be consistent. You always want to be doing the same actions, or else it gets very confusing for your students. But that's a good question. All right, let's see. Okay, so Laura asks, so Laura was saying hello to Liz from California. Hi, Liz, as well. There are some independent contractor restrictions for California. So basically, because of gig laws in different states, specifically California, I know there's like a bunch of other states as well, that causes issues with some of these online teaching companies. They basically don't hire from those states. So you'll have to see if you want to work for companies, if that company hires you, and if they don't, then you'll have to kind of look at your other options. I'm in Australia and I'm not sure about how this works in terms of like freelance teaching and all of that, but I do know that it does restrict what companies you can work for. Okay. Natina, hello in Georgia. Will you provide a list of equipment you have used or that others have used? Yes. So I have a list on Amazon of some like recommendations for different equipment that I have used or stuff at different budgets. You know, when you're just getting started, start with the basics, start with things that you have, and you can always upgrade as your business grows. So my link for that, I believe I have it here. Yes. So if you go to eslteacher365.com/Amazon, that will go to my Amazon storefront, and it has like online teaching equipment, some stuff for teaching abroad, books if you're taking the CELTA course, and even some YouTube supplies if you'd like to teach through YouTube as well. Okay, let's see if there's other questions. Daniel's asking, will there be a recording later? Yes, these lives are always recorded. So if you're joining late, no problem. You'll be able to catch up. Okay, I have a few other questions that I get asked a lot that I thought would be helpful. And again, if you're live and you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. So the first one is, where can I find teaching materials? So if you're working for an online company, they may be providing materials, they may not. There's, after 2020, a lot of different companies have made subscriptions with commercial use for online teachers, which if I had this, even because you can use them in the physical classroom as well as the online classroom, if I had those when I was first teaching, it would have made things so much easier, so much less lesson planning. One that I like is called ESL Brains. So they have basically slides, and then you get a worksheet and then all the answers for the teacher as well. And they have different levels. They have some business English lessons. But there's things like Abridge Academy is really good for kids. Those are a lot more interactive. There's also ESL Pals. There's Crystal Clear ESL. So there's a lot of different companies that offer this. Why I mentioned the commercial license is because technically, if you're not teaching for a public school, you are working for profit as an online teacher, which is generally the case. And that means that you need to follow copyright. And to follow copyright, you need to be using something that has a commercial license that says basically you can use it for profit. So all of these different subscriptions are going to come with that commercial license. You can also create your own materials. I've done that for a lot of my test prep classes. I create specific slideshows on Canva for my students, specifically for what they're working on. But of course, that's a lot of time and work and planning. So you can't really just like take random things off the internet. You want to be following that copyright. Some other questions. How do I know a student's level? This is very common for new teachers because maybe you don't know yet, like what is the difference between pre-intermediate and intermediate. So there are the CEFR levels, the Common European Framework of Reference of Languages, something like that. And you can take a look. There will be different rubrics of kind of what they can do at each level. And remember that your students might have a higher reading level, a lower speaking level. They could be kind of all over the place. It's not very common for people to have the exact same language level in all of the skills. So familiarize yourself with kind of what they should know at those levels, what kind of grammar topics they should know, what vocabulary they should know. If you go on a dictionary, like an online dictionary, they'll usually have, if it's A1 or B1, what the level of the words are, so you can kind of look up the words that your students are using. And again, obviously using that level test, you can get an idea of their level. But once you teach more and you have more experience with different levels, it's much easier to say, okay, this is an intermediate learner. This is an upper intermediate learner. So it just takes time, but there are some resources to help you with that. Okay. All right. Daniel asked, do you have any good books or websites that you can recommend that teach marketing for freelance teachers or freelancers in general? So that is a big thing about freelancing, is that you need to market to find your students. So if you are interested in teaching business English, there is a program that you can go through to learn how to use LinkedIn, and there's a lot of marketing strategies in that. I will put the link to that one. Let me just type it in here. So it'll be eslteacher365.com/challenge. So that is if you want to teach business English and use LinkedIn for marketing. If you want to use other social media or other ways, I am actually working on my freelance online teaching course right now, and I will be sharing a ton of different marketing strategies for freelancers. So that is coming soon. In terms of books, I'm not sure. A lot of the marketing strategies that I have learned, I've actually learned through working with my YouTube coach, from other teachers, from podcasts, from videos. So I'm not sure about books, but YouTube is a great resource for that. Okay. Another common question I get from new online teachers is, how can I stop being so nervous on camera? It's different being in front of a classroom and then having this camera on you and you're kind of the sole focus and that's all your students have to look at. And it's uncomfortable. Maybe you don't like listening to yourself, or you don't like the way you look, or whatever. But the more you teach online, the more you film yourself, you will get over it very, very quickly. I promise. It just takes kind of that focus on your students and how you're helping them. No one really cares what you look like. It really doesn't matter. It's more about how you are helping those students and sharing your knowledge with them. So just know that it does take time. It does get easier, and you'll reach a point where you could care less if you're on camera or not. But there are also maybe teachers who sometimes feel that maybe they want to teach only on a phone, or they don't want to teach with a camera. I'd say if you are that shy, I wouldn't recommend online teaching, because most of the opportunities, especially the ones that pay better, you have to be on camera. That is just part of this job. So yeah, just got to do it. All right, let's see. Any other questions? Okay, another question, kind of to go along with what was being asked before, is like, what is the best microphone, or what is the best computer? What do I use? Those kinds of things. Start with what you have. If you are a new teacher, whatever materials or equipment that you have, start with that. You can always upgrade later on, but don't let having the best equipment, the best microphone, the best camera stop you from getting started. It's best to just get started, and then as you grow your business, then you can start investing in different things. So don't let that be the reason that you don't get started, basically. And then also think about what your subject is. Like if you are teaching a subject where you're moving around, you're teaching yoga online, for example, you're going to want something like a clip-on microphone because you're moving around so much. If you're teaching ESL, invest in one of those headsets with the attached microphone because they're going to hear your pronunciation a lot better. So think about your subject and what that kind of entails and what that equipment would be like. Okay, well, I hope that this was a helpful video today. Again, if you have any questions, you can just leave a comment down below, or you can fill out my survey, you can send me an email. I'm always happy to help. And I wish you the best with your online teaching journey, and I will see you in our next video.